And I remember early on something you told me that has been one of my landmarks as a teacher and as a writer. You said, we spend the majority of our energy not doing what we want to do, not saying what we want to say. We have this voice in our heads that said, well, no, you couldn't get away with that. They wouldn't let you do that. You couldn't do that well. And then we explored together, and I think I've been exploring ever since. Well, what would happen if I took the lid off and said what I longed to say and did what I longed to do? But you gave me such a clear direction about the need to revolt against my reticence.
I would have said that you told me that.
Well, maybe that's the thing about the arts. Something comes up and it belongs to those who hear it and need it. It may originate in one person, but its ownership begins to spread out.
Hello, and welcome to the Insight Podcast from the Zion Canyon Mesa, a residency center for the arts and humanities in Springdale, Utah, surrounded by Zion National Park. I'm your host, Logan Hebner. Today's podcast is with Teresa Jordan in conversation with the poet Kim Stafford. Teresa and Kim go way back. They've been talking about the arts, about writing, and about practice for decades, and we look forward to the two of them exploring this idea even further. Teresa Jordan, welcome to Insight. What a pleasure.
Thank you, Logan. It's great to be here.
So, Teresa, we talked about the idea of a discussion about practice, and I'm hoping you can define that for us. What do you mean by practice?
I don't know what I'm sure that there are really official definitions of that. What it is for me is really about showing up with a sincere attention over and over without an attachment to results. And practice is something that, we talk about medical practice, we talk about legal practice. I'm thinking of it more in terms of artistic practice, of a painting practice, of a writing practice, of a music practice, just turning up in the studio every day and saying, if there's a muse out there who would like to get in touch with me, I'm available right now. And also spiritual practice. Sit and I have a Buddhist practice. I'd rather say I have a Buddhist practice than I am a Buddhist, but I have had a meditation practice for many, many years now, really of one form or another for 40 years.
Wow.
And it's turning up and being, and I've never been overly consistent. I've been a lot more consistent in the last few years than in the years previous, but it's being, I'm going to be really quiet now. And if there's anything the universe really needs to get my attention about, this would be a very good time.
Excellent. So I know that you've transitioned out of writing into other arts, and I'm wondering if in that transition and working with other arts, that you're noticing some of the same patterns within applying yourself like that, and maybe that's what prompted this interest in talking about practice or not.
That's a complicated question. I got my first book contract in my early 20s, 21, 22, I can't remember. And I was a publishing writer for the next 40 years. And there's something that Kim says in our conversation that follows. I believe he's quoting Elizabeth Gilbert about what you're good at may not necessarily be what your real calling is. And I really have such an incredible love of words and of writing, but I felt sort of trapped as a writer for all those years. I'm so grateful to it for the ways in which it let me struggle with making sense out of chaos. But I never experienced what Kim experiences, what you experience, what so many other people experience on any consistent basis, what you might call flow. And after 40 years, and it's very hard to leave writing. I think of all the arts, it's the one that perhaps makes the biggest moral claim on you. We're supposed to be the ones explaining it to the rest of the world, and to turn away from writing, I found it very difficult. On the other hand, I'm now doing something where I can't wait to get out of bed every morning,
Oh, wow.
and uh, and that is visual, and that is some sort of visual practice. That I was always fighting my head with writing, and I don't fight my head with visual practice.
Oh, yeah. Writing is horrible.
Oh, it is horrible. I mean, people who love writing think it's horrible.
So, and within this, why did you choose Kim Stafford for this discussion?
I think that Kim and his father, the poet William Stafford, Bill Stafford,
My favorite.
have done more to make practice accessible, understandable, across a, a, a wide terrain than anyone that I can think of in any field, whether it be spiritual practice or any of the creative practices, or they simply show. Sometimes I think practice is really, as I say, it's showing up, and they showed up. Bill showed up when Kim was his literary executor, and Kim took out of Bill and Dorothy's house 22,000 pages that Bill had written every morning before the sun came up, for, you figure the math, how many years, a lifetime. And Kim had a pretty dedicated practice before Bill died, and after he really witnessed what Bill had been up to, it became even more dedicated for Kim. And both of them talked about what happens when you show up day after day with earnest commitment and without a great attachment to results. You show up. If an idea, a darling, a gift, a creative impulse wants to get a hold of you, it can. And a lot of the time it's no good, but you keep showing up and the jewels arrive. Natalie Goldberg talks about this as well.
Yeah, I loved Writing Down the Bones. I really enjoyed that book. Teresa, I'm so pleased that you chose to have this conversation with Kim on Insight, and let's get to it.
Well, Kim, dear friend, here we are together in the same room, even though you're actually in Portland, Oregon, and I'm actually in Virgin, Utah. This is a conversation I've wanted to have with you for a long time about practice.
Well, really, this is a continuation of a conversation we started, what was it, 20, 30 years ago, Teresa? So good to continue.
Do you know, honestly, Kim, I was thinking about this. It's 35 years ago. You started. I should, let's introduce each other just briefly, and I'll start. Kim Stafford, my dear friend, started the Northwest Writing Institute at Lewis and Clark College in Portland, Oregon in 1986. Is that right?
That's correct.
And I started, and I had the great honor of being invited by you to teach there. And I think it was maybe the first year, maybe the second year, but that's 35 years ago if my math serves me right. And we have been dear friends since then. I also think of Kim as one of my great teachers and inspirations. And the Northwest Writing Institute took writing out into the community, taught writing to teachers so they could take it into the classroom, went out to small communities all over the state of Oregon. Kim and I taught independently, but also, Kim, you and I did a lot of teaching together. We taught a year-long class at the Oregon College of Art and Craft, writing to artists.
That
And
completely spoiled me. I never wanted to teach alone. I wanted to say, well, Teresa, what do you think about that?
it was this ongoing conversation, and I learned so much from Kim. I will also say Kim has retired from the Northwest Writing Institute after 35 years, and has just retired as the Poet Laureate of Oregon. And I think of, that retirement's such an interesting word. It just is an invitation for reimagination, I think. And the other thing I will say, Kim, is that I do believe you're one of the most generous people I've ever known. And you are a writing evangelist, a missionary of writing, and not so much to turn people into writers, to become career writers. So many, many, many of your students are exquisite writers, and have published exquisite books. But writing as a way to live your life, as a way to understand your life, as a process of generosity within the individual life. And that's one of the great gifts you have given me. You have given literally thousands of people at this point.
So, Teresa Jordan, when you came to Portland from the mythic land of Wyoming, I heard rumors of your presence. And when I was able to track you down, I realized I'm in the presence of a fellow seeker, a fellow creator. And I remember early on something you told me that has been one of my landmarks as a teacher and as a writer. You said, we spend the majority of our energy not doing what we want to do, not saying what we want to say. We have this voice in our heads that said, well, no, you couldn't get away with that. They wouldn't let you do that. You couldn't do that well. All these kind of ineffective parental put-downs or bully put-downs from in your head. And then we explored together, and I think I've been exploring ever since. Well, what would happen if I took the lid off and said what I longed to say? And did what I longed to do. And that's a work in progress. But you gave me such a clear direction about the need to revolt against my reticence. Seek independence, seek sovereignty of spirit. And teaching together really made that all the stronger. As I remember, we had a year-long class with half the class was students at the Oregon College of Art and Craft, and the other half was artists from the community. We had sculptors, we had painters, we had wild characters in there. And again, that set a tone for the way I wanted to write, the way I wanted to teach, and the way I wanted to live. Be among creators and don't hold back.
I would have said that you told me that.
Well, maybe that's the thing about the arts. Something comes up and it belongs to those who hear it and need it. It may originate in one person, but its ownership begins to spread out, expand.
And it's one thing that I love the practice of free writing, which I really came to use on a regular basis through your example. That was one of the many gifts you gave me. But Bill Kittredge used to say that the great Montana writer from Oregon originally, but ran the writing program at University of Montana for so many years and just left us after well into his 80s. But Bill used to say our subconscious or our unconscious is so much smarter than we are. And so to have some process that lets that speak to us. And I think sometimes, for you echoing or, repeating back to me something that I said to you 35 years ago, boy, I didn't think I knew that then. I don't know, I know it now. So maybe I did say it, but there's something that so often somebody will say, you said this and it changed my life. And I think, well, gosh, I need to hear that right now. So,
well, what that says to me is the miracle of language is a collaborative project. One's the speaker, one's the listener, and it doesn't really come to life until that exchange is made. And I would put with what you quoted from Kittredge, this thing that arrived in my notebook from somewhere. The liquid bounty of the inner life is deeper and more mysterious by several orders of magnitude than the most complex computer or technology. They are primitive as a paperclip compared to the richness of the inner life. So that's my manifesto about what awaits us if we surrender to a creative practice.
Oh, that's so beautiful, Kim, and that's so true. Tell me describe, if you would, your practice, your daily practice as it exists right now. And then
Yeah.
maybe touch on if it's changed.
Yeah.
Over
Can
the
I
years.
start with a story?
Of course, you could always start with a story.
I was about a year ago, I was at a dedication of a new art center here in Oregon, and they got a Navajo elder to do the land acknowledgement, the blessing at the beginning. And I'm sure the organizers thought, well, he'll speak for about 5 minutes and it'll be set the tone, and then we'll get on to the mayor and, the mucky mucks. This gentleman went on for about 45 minutes, and it was so wonderful. And one of the things he said was, all the creatures, they know what they're here to do. The birds, they know they're here to sing, they're here to fly, they're here to make nests, and rivers know where they're supposed to go, and the wind has a project. We can't figure it out, but the wind knows, and, all the creatures know what they're doing. And they're all watching us. And they're very puzzled because what they see is these humans wandering around. What am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to love? What am I here for? And he said, if you can figure out what you're here to do, all of creation will help you. All the animals, all the rivers, all the winds will help you, and you will dwell in an experience of the natural bounty of the earth. And I think practice for me started in probably childhood, chanting words, loving certain words. And then in high school, I had some wonderful teachers. But I was sort of working on the inspiration model. I feel like writing a poem, once in a while. And that changed really when my father died. Because my father, he wrote every day, but he wrote in the dark before we were awake. And about every year, a book would appear. But we didn't really know where they came from. They came from his hidden practice. But when he died, and I started carrying the boxes of 22,000 pages of daily writing to my car from my folks' house and then to the archive, I began to look at his practice. And this idea of sitting with a page, putting the date on it, and then going from there with low expectations, but kind of hunger for whatever comes, that made a big impression on me. And on January 1st, 2014, which was the centennial of his birth, I made a vow. I'm going to do that. And ever since, every day, I sit with a page, I write the date, I write some prose notes, I write an idea, is part 3, an aphorism, a question, and then I write a poem. So I've become a machine. And the practice is so nurturing, not just to my writing, but to my days, to my life, for my source as a teacher, as a citizen, as a friend. Without starting the day on my own terms, in touch with my liquid bounty of the inner life, I would be poor.
I'd love to talk just a little bit about your father's practice because it has been a model and a huge inspiration to me. And your father, William Stafford, one of the great poets of the great American poets, as is Kim Stafford, his son. But his model of practice, as I understood it, as you had described it to me, and as I understood it, was every day he would get up before dawn. I believe you told me once you felt like he had two lives. He had the life of the subterranean life, the life of the unconscious, which was before dawn. He would get up before dawn, make himself a cup of tea, a piece of toast, lay on the sofa, and you showed me the cushion on the sofa that was split and stained with the oils of the head.
The weight of his head over the years.
The weight of his head over the years. And at one point when you were young, one of your sisters had felt so sorry for your father being alone in the dark. And so she started getting up to keep him company. And he really, it was his alone time. But he didn't say, no, go back to bed. He just started getting up earlier and earlier until finally she gave up. And I love that story. But he would write a poem every day. And as I remember this story, he would pin it on the cupboard by the sink. And he would say about that poem, it didn't have to be a good poem. It could be a very bad poem. But he was a poet, so he should write a poem every day. And of all the parts of that story that are important to me, I think the one that has given me the entry into the beauty and surprise and generosity of practice is that it could be a very bad poem. Just turning up and knowing if it's a bad poem today and even a bad poem tomorrow and maybe a bad poem a week from now, somewhere in there's going to be this poem that just surprises you and somehow you're back in the flow.
Yeah, when you look through his pages, Teresa, there are a lot of lines I would not write down. I mean, this isn't worth writing down. There'd be a page of, forgive me, Daddy, clunkers. But in there would be a phrase. And several days later, it would show up in a fantastic poem. That idea, one time he said, if I don't welcome all my ideas, I'll train them to stay away. And even my bad ideas won't come to me. So that sense of utter welcome, I think it goes back to what you're saying about the inner life. For the writer to be the judge at the gate is disastrous. But to be the welcoming committee for whatever comes from within, that really turns on the spigot, and pretty soon all kinds of things are happening. I thought of a metaphor from our visit to Zion Park. You're in the open country, you're traveling, and then you come into this portal, and suddenly you are kind of in the underworld, paradise in the underworld, and everywhere you look, there are wonders. And that's, I think, how it is in a creative life. You enter into a space where in all directions things are holy, they're sacred, they're beautiful, at least to you. And what you bring forth may or may not please others, but you have been in the presence of the source. You've gone to holy ground, and to judge what you find there would be like in Zion, I don't like the view in that direction. That's really cool over there. Oh, how petty. No. Oh, that's wonderful, and that's wonderful. And look at that tree, look at that stone, look at that color, look at that cloud. Look at the silhouette of that tree. It's you're just in the presence of blessings.
I love that metaphor of entering the subterranean too, because it's in Zion Canyon. You are looking up. You are in the heart of the earth. And it's sort of the opposite of Grand Canyon, which most people experience, unless they're on the river. Most people experience it looking down. And they're both absolutely magnificent. And practice is that way too, that we come at it from different directions. It manifests in different ways. We see things in our own particular ways. I love David Whyte, the Irish poet. There's a line of his I love, that our job is to have the one conversation in this world that only we can have.
Yeah.
And it's, to trust that, to begin to trust that that you are here receiving something that the very person next to you isn't receiving, because they're a different person, and it will
And
manifest.
the wonderful thing about being an artist, you could share that with the person next to you, and they could share with you what you can't see. It's this wonderful, it can be this wonderful ecosystem of exchange. John Muir saying, once you look closely at any one thing, you see it's connected to everything else.
Right.
And artists, it can be solitary, it can be a lonely calling, but it can also be, you become part of a tremendous web, between the earth, the past, your fellow creatures, and the future.
I mentioned earlier that your generosity throughout your life is something that's been really, it's just such a pleasure to me to receive. And here I have right here just these little books that you do. I was looking at your biography on the web, and it says you've published a dozen books or something. Well, you've published 50 books, and these beautiful little books that you send out to friends. This is December's Children, a month of daily writing. This is 9 stories.
Can I say something
from
about
Affinities.
December's?
Yes.
Yeah, so I just, I've been making these little books, and I thought, well, I'll just take a month of daily writing and put these 31 poems into a book. So December's Children, So I made the little book, and I sent off a classroom set to a friend in Louisiana, and he gave it to his college students, and one of his students had just a priceless response after reading the book. He said, "They're not all good." I thought, well, of course they're not all good.
Isn't that
That's not
freeing?
how it works. Yeah. Oh. But, I'll put my father in here one more time. Someone asked him, what's your favorite thing you ever wrote? And he said, I love all my children, but I would trade everything I've ever written for the next thing. And I think that is a key to happiness, to think, I am not judged by what I have done. I have access to pleasure through the portal of what I will do. That's a kind of eternal life within mortality.
Well, it is. Yes, it is. I think of you sort of going out in the world like, Johnny Appleseed, or the great sower, and, throwing poems in every direction. And another one of your fellow laureates, Henry Riegel, who is the poet laureate of
Hank,
Hank, yes, of Montana. And when Henry was the poet laureate of Montana, there were, just a couple things. One thing that he wanted to do was to ride horseback from one end of Montana to the other. And Montana is a very broad state. Yeah. And he rode up on the High Line, the far northernmost part of the state. And he would give away books of poetry to children. And it just giving that away. And there's another story that he told us from years previous. And I think even before he thought of himself as a poet rather than someone who wrote poetry. But he was going down south, I don't know where he was, New Mexico, Arizona, and he broke down, and he didn't have any money, and he really needed to get his truck fixed. And and this mechanic said, well, what do you have? And Henry said, well, I have these poems. And so he said, well, I'll take those, So he took the poems and he fixed the truck. And, I
Yeah.
think that was a pretty good trade.
That should not be an unusual story. I want to live in a world where people's gifts are treasured by each other. Yeah, I love that story. Just, boy, I'll carry that image of, I imagine Hank reaching into his saddlebag and handing down a book to a child.
Yeah.
That should be a children's book, Teresa. How
Oh,
about
don't you
writing and
think?
illustrating that as a
Yeah.
children's book? Hank rides the High Line.
Well, and he's a beautiful artist too,
Well, let's get him to write it
I
then.
know exactly. Oh, I think we could do that. I
I
think this
think
is
we could.
yeah,
Yeah. Imagine him in Zion giving a reading from horseback.
absolutely.
That would be memorable.
They're on the big lawn of the lodge. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
See, this is the kind of thing that when we start imagining what could happen, what would be beautiful, what is something completely new that's never been done, that kind of joy is available when you have a practice. Imagine having access to that every day.
yeah. I want to talk about. I want to talk about the surprises that continually arise in practice. But first, I want to talk a little bit about ritual. And do you know the book Free Play by Stephen Nekmanovich? And he's on improvisation, and this is a book that's been really important for both Hal and my husband Hal Cannon, musician Hal Cannon, and myself. And one thing that he talked about was the idea of the tenemos. And the Greek word, the tenemos, was the sacred circle. This was the cathedral, if you will, or the sacred circle in which what you stepped across into this circle, and magic, you expected magic to happen. This was the sacred space. And I find that so many creators, visual artists, writers, musicians, whatever, there's a certain ritual of stepping into this space. In my studio, I come over here, I generally wake up very early in the morning. I light the fire, I light incense, I light these candles. I have a little altar with my Buddha and my photographs of my teachers. I sit for 25 minutes and then I do just 15 minutes of yoga, and then I draw. And just coming into that space, lighting the fire, lighting the candle. I think Terry Tempest Williams puts a glass of water, of fresh water, on her desk and keeps a flower. And if even when I'm away from home, when I sit down to my practice, I carry that ritual with me. I don't have a fireplace, I don't have a candle, I don't have a piece of incense, and yet that ritual is there in the seat of the car while we're driving through the Badlands,
Yeah.
or the little desk at the library. So, what is your tenemos?
Well, I have a parallel morning ritual on a usual day of getting up at 4 or 4:30, taking a half-hour walk through the dark neighborhood, and then going to my writing shed with coffee, and I just sit in the dark for a while. I used to get there, turn the light on, and get to work, but I realized, wait a minute, this liminal entry will add to my experience. So I just sit in the dark and just watch my mind wander. And then I turn on the light and I start my daily writing page, the date, the boring prose, what I call it, writing before you have to write well. And then the aphorism. And then I look in my little notebook, or sometimes I look at a page I wrote in class, because, my classes are active. Let's write together, and there might be a beginning there. Or I just think of a phrase or an idea. Can I read you mine from this morning?
I'd love you
Just
to do
started
that.
with a kind of a corny phrase, a breakfast for the ages. I think someone said, when I'm making dinner, I don't tell myself I'm about to make the greatest dinner of all time. You just say, well, I'm making dinner because it's time for dinner. And this person, I wish I could remember who it was. Maybe it was you, Teresa, said, so when you write, you don't, give yourself the challenge, this better be good. You say, well, I'm going to write. This is my meal. So this is called a breakfast for the ages. When I make breakfast, I do not make a breakfast for the ages. I seek to sustain this glorious day by oatmeal thick with blueberries. Ah, what's finer? Steaming, hot. And when I write in the early morning and then send forth my little spell by Instagram, there to seek those few precious readers I will never meet, may I be like weather in a life, various, generous, more timely than timeless, affectionate in mist and rain, written on water, not in stone, a moment's blessing, simple as oats, for you.
Okay, that's so lovely. That's so lovely. And then see now there, that I remember Richard Hugo, another wonderful Northwest and Montana poet. I think in his book The Triggering Town, and he was writing about the trigger. And so you have you start out with an idea, and it might be the blessed rain. That wasn't quite the term; it's something about the rain. Yeah. And you write a couple lines about rain that are just exquisite, and then you keep writing about rain, and pretty soon, it's just dreadful. and so, it might be in. You have to let it go. You have to let it turn where it will. And in the end, the poem may not even be about rain at all, but it was the trigger that got you somehow.
I remember he called it writing off the subject.
Writing off the subject, exactly.
In school, we're trained to get our topic sentence, and then go for 5 pages or 12 pages or whatever the teacher says. But you're right. The part of the way the imagination works is the presenting subject is the portal to the palace of mysteries. And you don't know which door you're going to open next. The turn in the poem where, in our conversation, where first it's Zion and then it's creativity. First it's oatmeal and then it's poetry. And those are connected. Again, John Muir, oatmeal and poetry. Oh, they're kin. I want to put one thing in here that seems to pertain. My dad's poetry teacher. So William Stafford's poetry teacher, Paul Engel, at University of Iowa in the early 50s, he said something to the class that has become a landmark for me. He said the most important poetry will occur at the intersection between the most ordinary experience and the most unusual imagination. So you don't have to have an adventurous life to write adventurous things, but you have to attend to what I call the sacred ordinary all around you with full attention. What is behind that? What is under that? What is that waiting for me to see or to say?
I have on my bookshelves behind me here that you can see. I have collected quotations. I love my entire life, and I've and I decided that I would print out favorite quotations, and just glue them onto the front faces of the shelves and the verticals. And so I come into this room and I'm surrounded by the voices of people. And I, it something will leap off, the shelf to me. But anyway, the quotation I have of yours, and it's right on top. Well, actually, it's the second shelf of where the Buddha is. It's right under the Buddha, and it says, "I would rather be aware than wise. I would rather be aware than wise."
Yeah.
That paying attention.
Yeah, that goes with something Elizabeth Gilbert has been saying, that they used to say, follow your bliss and you'll find your way. But she said, I think there's something more important than bliss, and that's curiosity. Follow your curiosity. And that goes with something one of my students said one time. She said, don't choose what you do by what you're good at. Choose what you do by what makes you pay attention.
Yes.
So that is that awareness, what calls to you, what makes you bow down and look at closely. That's the world maybe saying, here's your portal. Here's what only you can see. Pay attention.
When my grandson was born 7 years ago, you think, what do you want for this spirit coming into the world?
Yeah.
And, I realized if there was one thing that I could hope for him, it would be that he was blessed with curiosity. And he is, by the way. He's an incredibly curious child, and a scientist. I mean, a scientist from his earliest explorations. But because curiosity will pull you through. So there's such a history of depression and bipolar in creatives. And I don't know that there's a higher incidence in creatives than the rest of the world of those, if you want to call them malaises. But I think that it is the curiosity that pulls them through these malaises where other people are entirely crippled by them. And if there is any gift that I'm glad to be blessed with, it is this great curiosity.
Well, you make me think of Van Gogh. He was obsessed with crows, tables, stars, cypress trees, potatoes. He had terrible demons that eventually got him. But along the way, he was companioned by these, I'm going to say again, the sacred ordinary. He just loved looking. And he had something that went with that. He said in one of his letters to Theo, I would not see my paintings on the wall in the parlor. I would see my painting in the snug cabin of a small boat tossed in a storm as a comfort to sailors. So that idea of the purpose of art is to accompany, to strengthen, to companion those in need. And so the artist, with the prow of curiosity, pushing through the storm in order to convey all of us to a safe harbor of some kind. Can I tell one other story here?
Of course you can.
I have this Inupiat friend, Joe Sanungatuk, in Alaska, and he was always telling me stories about his village. In my village, which is the village of Kingikin, north of Nome, way up there on the coast of the Bering Sea. And he told the story that when he was in fourth grade, his teacher was Caroline Kuntz. And she had been a professor at Dartmouth of music. And then her husband got a job running the weather station in Kingikin, this very isolated place. No roads, no cars, no library, no post office, no doctor. I mean, very remote place. And so what's she going to do in Kingikin? Well, I'll teach fourth grade. But she didn't know how to teach fourth grade, so she just kept teaching college. And they listened to symphonies and they talked about paintings and all kinds of things. They never knew what she was going to do. So here are these little Inupiat kids, and they come into school one morning, and it's 40 below outside, and the wind's blowing, and it's dark. It's the Arctic night. They're north of the Arctic Circle. And Miss Kuntz says, children, put on your coats. We're going on a field trip. Well, they didn't know what a field trip. What is it? We're out in this remote place in the wilderness. So they're holding hands, these little kids, 2 by 2, and they're going along the boardwalk down the middle of the village. And then she says, "Okay, turn this way." And they start up into the dark, up on the Cape Mountain where there's nothing. And they're trudging up there, and Joe's the little girl next to him leans over and says, "She's going to kill us." What is she doing? There's nothing up there. Well, they get partway up the mountain, and they come to a little flat spot there. And Miss Kuntz says, "Children, I want you to turn around and look at your village." And Joe said, "As I turned around, I became an artist." Because I had never looked at my village. And I looked down, and, there were the stars. There was a little cluster of lights down there, and I realized that is my village. Those are my people. I need to take care of them. I need to honor them. And I think when people decide to turn into the arts, into creative practice, into a ritual, it's like turning and looking at your village. And it's like the Navajo elder saying, once you know what you're here to do, all of creation will help you.
That is just that story is just, it's so nourishing, isn't it?
Yeah.
To hear that. I mean, I feel nourished as if I were just, eating the most exquisite, taste when I was famished. And there's part two of there's a, of that, look at what you've just given me. I mean, you really have given me a gift in that story. And there is, in the creative process, there is this point, also another turning around where you want to give it away. Lewis Hyde and his lovely book, The Gift, Imagination and the Erotic Life of Property, yes. Yeah. And it's such an important book to me. But he talked about that we talk about artists as gifted, and then they struggle with some sort of creative process, whether it's music or writing or baking or visual art. And it's a way to make some order out of chaos. And then when they have done that, there's this next step that arises, which is the desire to give it away. And I think, there was a story that, and this may be apocryphal, but I did a lot of research, as you know, on pioneer women and women homesteaders. And there's a story of the woman homesteader who would write poems, and she was so lonely, she had no one to share them with, and that she would sew them onto tumbleweeds, in the hope that they would snag up somewhere and someone would find them. It's the letter in the bottle. But there's, you post on Instagram every day. I post on Instagram every day. And Instagram is sort of, in its way, it is the poem sewn onto the tumbleweed. And I want to just talk to you about that part of the practice of what, you could just be stacking these up and then putting them into little books and big books. Yeah. But every day you post, and Kim, you post often 2 or 3 and more times, of poems that come up during the day. But talk about social media and the gift.
Yeah, well, this takes me back, Teresa, to a time I was with our mutual friend Jim Heinen. We were in a high school talking about writing and being a writer. And one of the kids asked a kind of a common question. "Have you written any bestsellers?" And Jim said, "No, but, my book is on the table at the AA meeting in Detroit." And I said, I haven't written a bestseller, but a friend of mine was going to Russia, and he paid a translator to translate one of my essays into Russian. So when he met people and they said, "Tell me about your country," he could say, "Here, read this." And Jim said, one of the astronauts took one of my books in his personal preference kit into space. We just started, and I said, I got a message from a nurse who was attending a child dying of leukemia, and every night they read my children's book. So this gift economy, these tumbleweeds, you send these things out, as Lewis Hyde says, with they're not encumbered by commerce.
Yes.
One thing I say about poetry is the great thing about poetry is you can't make money doing it. And what that means is you are free. No one will say, well, if you do it this way, you could make more money, because that's completely irrelevant. So, the technology, all kinds of problems. I mean, we're trying to make Facebook humane. What a Sisyphean task. And yet, I can click a button and a little morsel of story, poetry, song that has come to me will get on that tumbleweed and head downwind. And I don't need to know where it goes. I just feel happy that it has a path.
Yeah. I want to tell another Jim Heinen story. And Jim Heinen's a wonderful writer from Iowa, and he has written many things, but one of my favorite are the stories of the boys. And the boys are told, these stories are told in the voices, in the multiple, in a us voice, not a first person, but a second person voice. And they're these brilliant farm stories that are the stories of the whole world. But we were talking, Kim, you and I had been talking about free writing and, writing for 5 minutes, or timed writing for 10 minutes. And Jim said, I couldn't possibly get anything done, in 10 minutes. But he was curious about it, so he started trying it. And right about this time, he and Sally were going to get married. And so anyway, he had been having all these just great experiences, writing for 10 minutes, and something would actually turn up in 10 minutes' time. So he thought it was his wedding day. And he thought, if I can write on my wedding day, I can write anywhere, anytime. So he sat down to write for 10 minutes. He wrote something, and it was so brilliant. He immediately wanted to show it. He wanted to give it away. He wanted to show it to people. Well, everybody was so busy getting ready for the wedding.
We're busy, Kim.
Nobody wanted
to
listen to it.
That's right. Well, now let me tell one more Jim Heinen story. I think it's very pertinent. He was in Alaska, and he'd been trying to write his novel for a long time, years. And but he just didn't have time to get going on it. So he met these two women who had each written a novel on their lunch hours over the course of years. And he was humbled. So he decided, instead of trying to find the time to write a novel, I'm going to use my lunch hour to write what he calls fables, which are these little stories you've been telling about. And he realized creative life is possible for everyone. You don't have to be rich. You don't have to go to a writing retreat. You don't have to be lionized. If you give yourself the gift of 10 minutes, 15, 20, you will enter into the realm of the creative spirit.
You can step into the sacred circle with a very short amount of time on your hands, and it's surprising what will come.
I hope people listening to us will be converted to try it for a week. I'm gonna every day for a week, and then I'll see if I can stop.
Yes. Yes, that's what I say. You're an evangelist, which I love. Taking the good news out to the world. I want to talk a little bit about the discipline of practice, about turning up every day, and I've had a meditation practice since I was 20, and was introduced to transcendental meditation in college. And it's something I haven't always done every day, but I've always come back to, even after long hiatuses, or however you might say the plural hiatus. But So I would say I am not so disciplined as persistent. I will always come back to this to practice, even though I leave it for quite a while. And can I read you something? A book
Please.
that
Oh, I hope so.
I was just introduced to this book by Ross Gay, a poet and essayist, and it's the Book of Delights. So one thing with practice that I find helps is to put some sort of limitation around it, and to put like my book, The Year of Living Virtuously, weekends off. The limitation was I would write about a virtue or a vice very non-righteously, but every day, once a week for a year. The Book of Delights, Ross Gay's book, he decided that every day for a year he would notice a delight and write about it. He called these little writings essayettes. And he found that by tuning into delight, he found that he had to look for it to see it. And it was like a muscle. He was building the muscle of delight. And the more delight he looked for, the more delight he found. And it isn't kumbaya. I mean, this book is filled also with sorrow, with losses and pain and death. And that in order to see delight, you have to, an artist knows this, that in order, to render a form, the light and the dark have to be in this conversation. But anyway, this is about this idea of daily practice, of the discipline of practice. And he wrote, when I began this gathering of essays, which, yes, come from the French essayer, meaning to try or to attempt, I planned on writing one of these attempts every day for a year. The first essay or try or attempt that I skipped was on day 4. Believe me, I had a good reason for blowing it off. I can't remember it now, but it was convincing. Probably I got tired and thought, oh, I'll just write 2 tomorrow. Except when tomorrow, yes, right? You've been there. Except when tomorrow actually came around, I was daunted at the prospect of trying 2 in the same day. One try is hard enough. What if both attempts were awful? He goes on, I was probably absent 5 times in 13 years of primary school, despite having had 2 surgeries and pretty serious asthma, breaking a few bones, and not infrequently falling hard on my face. I had a paper route for most of those 13 years, and literally, not like the kids say literally, I mean literally never skipped a day, even after the night when I was about an hour away with a new lover. And about a week before my old man was diagnosed with liver cancer, I was hanging around the house when he was getting ready to head out to his job at Applebee's. I said, "Oh man, blow it off. Let's go watch Hellboy." He looked at me wistfully while tucking in his shirt and sliding his belt through the loops. You have no idea how bad I wish I could. That was the first time he'd said anything like that. I was 29. And so, in honor and love, I delight in blowing it off.
Yeah, and those essays, I just heard an interview with him. He gave himself 30 minutes to write those essays. And what results is a kind of buoyant, conversational, it's like talking to a friend. There's an improvisational quality to it, which is delightful.
I think of you, as just, and I have to read one other thing. I think of you and of your father, of having this immutable daily practice every day without fail. And I think that you have picked up that thread to large extent. But here was a Kim Stafford poem 2 or 3 days ago on Instagram. When my to-do list is done for. Do it now, do it all, my father said. But his way was never mine. Instead, like a snowplow, I push attentions ahead through days and decades until the plow stalls and I stare at the heap of bruised treasure before me, never to be done. But then I find my father's lament from his final days. It's heavy to carry, the sack of what you might have done, and you can't do it anymore. So, heap of plans, I walk around you and proceed on foot, off the road, off the path, deep into the forest of delights.
I'm trying to talk myself into freedom.
So I want you to talk about blowing it off.
Yeah, well, I have to tell a story. I was in a coffee shop before the pandemic, and there were two very fast-talking Type A surgeons there. And one of them said, "Oh, I went to hear the Dalai Lama, and I had a chance to ask a question." And I said, "Your Holiness, how long should I meditate every day?" And he said, "Oh, half hour every day." And I said, "But Your Holiness, what if it's a really busy day?" "Oh, 2 hours." Because you'll need it. You know, people who think they don't have time to be happy, to be creative, to be kind, they don't have to wait for hell. It's right here. But to recognize that the more attrition there is in your life, the more the bounty of the experience of curiosity and awareness and creation and connection, friendship, the more you need that, and the more you will delight in it. So blowing it off, okay, I'll confess, I've had a couple days when I thought, well, I'll write two tomorrow. But the funny thing about it is I had a great time writing those two. And the second one wasn't very good. It wasn't very interesting. But I caught up. And I think that probably happens maybe 2 or 3 times a year. Otherwise, as I tell my students, if you write something every day, the writing won't always be stellar, but it'll be a better day. It will be a better day. And it will bring you to the next morning eager to try again.
And it is sort of like, being at Zion Canyon looking up or Grand Canyon looking down. But I'm going to be the devil's advocate. And so many writers, artists, I'm just going to, creatives, have had long periods that they aren't creating at all. Yeah. And then they do come back. And I have had long periods where I'm not creating at all. And then every time when I do come back, this is what I was saying, I'm persistent if not disciplined. I will always come back, even if I've been away. Mm-hmm. And I had to get over the idea of making up for lost time. Just start afresh, it's a new day. But what I find is that in that fallow field, things have actually been cooking. There may be some, like just for instance, oil painting. I mean, I may have forgotten a little bit I may have to get my licks up in terms of mixing paint, but I've actually made a leap in my visual sensibility. And that in that fallow period, something was going on. And to have faith in that. Because I think that one thing that actually stops a lot of people is the idea, I've missed a day, I've missed 2 days, I can't ever catch up. It's impossible. And they leave. And so I'll take that, I'll take that being persistent rather than being disciplined.
Yeah, Teresa, I love your use of the word fallow, because this is how nature does it. Mm-hmm. How does spring happen? Well, winter, that's how it happens. And that cycle that we're born into, that we observe, at least in the temperate zone. But anywhere, a day and night, dawn comes. How does dawn come? Well, there had to be some darkness. How does the delicious experience of an inhalation work? Well, exhalation. And I've been noticing when I sit in the dark and I really attend to my breathing, the flavor of exhalation has a tinge of toxicity to it. It's the CO2 leaving our bodies. And a tree is waiting for my exhaled breath. And I'm waiting for that oxygen from the tree. We have a little wind coming back and forth. Beginnings and endings, whether it's of a day, a year, a life, a poem, that's where it's at. And so to end and go fallow is a prelude to beginning. I feel like, as a teacher, I'm a professor of beginnings. I'm an advocate of trying, starting, not knowing, putting down a word to see what word it will lead to. And I have this little formula that I sometimes say to my students. I'm more fond of writing in process than finished writing. Finished writing it has its glories, but it's a fossil. Writing in process, it's alive. It's a river. It's learning its way forward. And I'm more fond of writers than writing. They are so full of hidden stories. They're so fun to be around and to bring forth what's within them. And I'm actually more fond of people than writers. They have lives. They know places. They have a lineage. And so to be an artist or a teacher, for me, is to be in a playground of wonders. We're back to Zion Canyon. It's going into the place where color speaks in magic, wind, silhouette, sound, silence. That's available to all of us through some kind of creative practice.
In this podcast series that they're doing a number of things around the anthropology of truth, and which is such a great phrase. So there is a title for you that I would just like to toss into the daily cauldron: the anthropology of truth.
Yeah, well, that word truth has been under siege for some time recently. But we know its etymology has kinship with tree, with truce. Truth, I think, is a human implement for orientation in a world of change and attrition and danger. The way a tree stands, the way a truce empowers connection, is the way truth rewards the seeker. When you go into a landscape and you revert to our oldest habit of hunting and gathering, you go along intuitively. What's calling to me? Where's the bounty? Where's the nourishment? And often, especially in a place like Zion, what's awaiting you is a moment of spirit, like a little whirlwind of truth that maybe visit you and leave its mark. So the anthropology of truth is, to me, that phrase suggests this is available to every culture, not the dominant culture. In fact, it may be absent in the dominant culture. It may be more empowered in a hard life, in a forgotten life, an indigenous life. But in that life lies the future, because truth, finally, it's our food. It's our oxygen.
Sometimes I think we do have to grow quiet, that sitting in the dark before you start to write. And I've been finding I've had this practice now for the past 100+ days of drawing a bird every day. Yeah. And it's just taken me in all sorts of places. And this week I've started looking at red-crested cranes. This is a sacred bird of Japan. And they were terribly endangered, just on the very edge of extinction. In fact, there was a single pair that was known to exist. And I just saw a very short video about this yesterday. I really want to explore this more. And this farmer in the forest knew that this was the only pair that he could see, and it was believed to be the only pair. And I don't know if that was known at the time or if it was in retrospect, but he realized that he needed to nourish these cranes, and he started feeding them grain because of all the farming that had happened and the disruption of the ecosystem. Their winter food had disappeared, so he started feeding them grain. And this was maybe 40 years ago, and this became his practice every day of feeding this pair and then their babies. And the cranes are not safe, but they're no longer on the edge of extinction. And it's a sort of truth. He was paying attention, and he saw there's this beautiful thing, and it could disappear in front of my eyes, and I am called toward that beauty.
That reminds me of a story from Bhutan. We were in January at a place called Pobjika, which is where the black-necked cranes come to winter from Tibet. And they've done it forever in this valley. And so the king decreed there will be no power lines because the cranes might injure their wings. So, Teresa, imagine a whole country with the awareness of that farmer. We must change our ways to give the cranes a chance. So we're in Pobjika, and because there are no power lines, it was very cold and very dark on this January night, and we were sitting around the stove, and there was a Bhutanese gentleman there, Chering, who just started talking. You know, the fire was crackling, the holly wood was burning, and the pine billets, and Chering said, "Do you know, people who do not yet know the Buddha tend to view the past as a series of errors or crimes or even sins, and the future as a series of punishments for those errors. And these people find it very difficult to enjoy the present moment. People who have begun to know the Buddha," and we could say have a meditation practice, have a art practice, have a friend they can talk to, have a way to think things through. Those who begin to know the Buddha view the past as destiny. That is what happened. That is my story. That is what brought me here. And the future as freedom. Knowing who I am and what my story is, I am free to decide where I go. And such people are able to enjoy the present and to help others. And, where do you learn that? Well, from the cranes, from the earth, from the seasons, from the way trees grow, from the way seeds enact their miracles, and from study. And, I thought, how do you turn a sense of the past as errors to a sense of the past as a story? Well, with a pen, with a paintbrush, with the bow of a violin, by parenting, by friendship. There's so many ways to do it.
And by having some entry, some practice, some habit of quiet, where you can hear beyond. There's in Zen, there's a saying that a single breath can change what comes next. To take that breath, to take that minute of settling, of grounding, of earthing before the hard conversation or before the easy conversation. Just before we started talking today, and I was sort of running around trying to I couldn't find earphones that worked, and you know how it is. And I just sat, before at 5 minutes of sign-on time, I just sat and grew quiet. And it was just, and that was, we've talked a lot about generosity. That little moment of quiet does change what comes next. A single breath
Yeah.
can change what comes
Yeah.
next.
Yeah, to settle your accounts is the way I think of it. If you're upset about something, to settle your accounts so that you can go forth unencumbered to address the impossible. Can I read a little poem here?
I would love you to do
It's
that.
called Dew and Honey. Sip by sip, in thimble cup, the meadow bees will drink it up, then ferry home to bounty's hive, flowers flavor, hum, and thrive, to show us how through word and song, by gesture small and patience long, in spite of our old foolish ways, we may fashion better days. So, my friend, come sip and savor syllables as crumbs of pleasure. By honor, in each conversation, we begin a better nation.
I love that. I love that.
What a pleasure to talk with you,
What a
Teresa. I
pleasure
feel
to
like
talk
I've been
with
to
you.
Zion, I've been to Alaska, I've been to Japan, I've flown with the cranes. It's just such a delight to talk with you.
Well, it's a delight to talk with you, Kim. It always is. This is a conversation that's gone on for over 35 years and will continue for another 35 years.
We are persistent.
We are persistent. So I will want to put one more benediction into this conversation. That I lead a guided meditation once a week, and I did one on vitality, and I was remembering this from David White's book, Crossing the Unknown Sea, Work is a Pilgrimage to Identity. And he was very disheartened with his work and with his life, and it just exhausted, completely depleted. And a friend of his, I may not remember the name right, Brother Daniel, I believe, was coming over, and David was just so exhausted. And his friend came, and they had wine. He poured out wine for them, and he was sitting there, and he just said to Brother Daniel, he just said, "Tell me about exhaustion." And the brother, looked at him and just sort of took in the situation. And then he said, the antidote to exhaustion is not necessarily rest. And David looked at him and just said very woodenly, so exhausted he could hardly get to the end of his own sentence, but the antidote to exhaustion is not rest. And the brother said, no, the antidote to exhaustion is wholeheartedness.
Yeah, each person might put a different word in there. What makes you feel alive? Yeah. It could be purpose. It could be a sense of mission. It could be there's someone who relies on me. That would make exhaustion not only bearable, but a companion in the work. This is part of it. This too is part of it. That idea of wholeness, the whole life.
And of course, heart. Courage is the core word is heart. So, wholeheartedness is to find, is to find your own particular fierceness, your own particular courage. And we're all very courageous in some ways and not at all courageous in others. But to find that, that whole heart and sally forth.
You helped me find it. Thank you, Teresa.
That was Teresa Jordan in conversation with Kim Stafford. And thanks to both of you for allowing us to tap into your ongoing 35-year conversation. Thanks to Ben Kilborn for doing the sound. Thank you, Ben. The Observatory did our music. Thank you, Observatory. And I would like to thank the Eccles Foundation, the town of Springdale, and O.C. Tanner for their faith and funding. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please leave us a review. It really helps. I'm really excited about our next podcast with Mark Johnson, co-founder of Playing for Change. Go ahead and Google that, playingforchange.com or playingforchange.org. You'll spend a couple hours in there listening to their music. I'm Logan Hebner for the Zion Canyon Mesa Arts and Humanities Residency. This has been Insight. Thank you for your time. Stay tuned and stay safe.